Welcome, time travelers. SolaTales here, and tonight's adventure takes us straight to the medieval inn of the warm and welcoming Owen. So dim the lights, sit back, and relax. Chapter 1. The Afternoon Light. The late afternoon sun streamed through the diamond-paned windows of the Hearthstone inn, casting warm geometric patterns across the worn oak floorboards of the common room. Owen Blackthorne, innkeeper for these past 27 years, moved with the unhurried grace of a man who had found his place in the world. At 52, his hands bore the gentle marks of honest work, calloused from handling endless bundles of firewood, stained faintly from years of drawing ale from wooden casks, and softened by the countless times he had smoothed fresh linens across welcoming beds. The inn itself stood like a comfortable guardian along the Pilgrim's Road, its 3 stories of honey-colored timber and grey fieldstone, weathered to a pleasing patina by decades of sun and rain. Between the market town of Millbrook to the south and the great cathedral city of Canterbury to the north, the Hearthstone had earned its reputation as a place of genuine comfort. Travelers spoke of it in hushed, grateful tones, not grand enough for nobility, perhaps, but possessed of something far more valuable, the kind of authentic warmth that could ease the ache from tired bones and troubled hearts. The common room stretched before Owen in familiar perfection. Heavy oak beams, dark with age and smoke, supported the ceiling in graceful arcs. The great fieldstone hearth dominated the western wall, its blackened stones holding the memory of 10,000 fires. Around it, sturdy wooden tables bore the gentle scars of countless meals shared, their surfaces worn smooth by the friction of pewter plates and earthenware bowls, the pressure of elbows, and the careful placement of travel packs. Owen's gaze settled on his constant companion, Nutmeg, a marmalade tabby of indeterminate age who had claimed the inn as her own territory years ago. She lay curled upon a wool cushion of deep blue, positioned with feline precision to catch both the fire's warmth and the last golden rays of afternoon sun. Her fur seemed to glow in the light, and her gentle purring provided a constant, soothing undertone to the inn's peaceful atmosphere. Moving toward the great hearth, Owen felt the familiar satisfaction of a task that needed no thought, only care. The afternoon fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, their surfaces shifting between deep red and ash gray as the air moved across them. This was the daily ritual of banking, ensuring that the precious embers would remain alive but controlled, ready to spring into full flame when evening brought the need for greater warmth and light. With practiced hands, Owen selected pieces of seasoned oak from the wood box beside the hearth. Each log had been split the previous autumn and stored in the dry shed behind the inn, where the wood had lost its green moisture and gained the density that would make it burn long and clean. The weight of the oak was substantial in his hands, not the light, quick-burning wood of birch or pine, but the kind of fuel that would sustain a fire through the long evening hours ahead. He arranged the logs with deliberate care, creating small spaces for air to flow while ensuring that the wood would catch gradually from the coal bed beneath. The process required no conscious thought after so many years, yet Owen never hurried through it. There was something meditative about the work, something that connected him to every innkeeper who had ever tended a hearth for the comfort of strangers. As he worked, the inn settled around him with its familiar collection of sounds. The oak beams creaked gently as the afternoon warmth gave way to the cooler air of approaching evening. Somewhere in the walls, Mice went about their small business with tiny scratching sounds that had long since become part of the inn's natural symphony. From the kitchen came the distant clatter of pottery as Marta, his cook and housekeeper, went about her own afternoon preparations. The church bells of Millbrook chimed the hour across the countryside, their bronze voices carrying clearly on the still air. 4 bells, 4 hours past noon. Soon enough, evening would begin its gentle approach, and with it would come the possibility of travelers seeking shelter for the night. Owen had learned, in his years of keeping the inn, to read the subtle signs that suggested whether the evening would be quiet or busy. Today, something in the quality of the light, the direction of the distant clouds, and the way the road dust had settled suggested that the evening might bring more than the usual trickle of solitary pilgrims or local farmers. With the fire properly banked, Owen stepped back to survey his work. The coals glowed with steady warmth, ready to burst into welcoming flame at the first breath of the bellows. Around them, the oak logs waited with patient readiness, their pale heartwood exposed where his axe had split them, their bark still bearing the rough texture of the forest. The whole arrangement possessed a quiet beauty that spoke of competence and care, the hallmark of hospitality done well. Nutmeg opened one amber eye to observe his work, seemed to approve of his arrangements, and returned to her afternoon dreams. The sun continued its slow arc towards the western horizon, and Owen felt the deep satisfaction that came from a familiar task, completed with attention and skill. Soon he knew the real work of the evening would begin. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Messenger. The sound of approaching hoofbeats on the packed earth road caused Owen to look up from his contemplation of the hearth. Through the diamond-paned windows, he could see a rider approaching at the steady canter of someone with purpose, but not urgency. The horse was a sturdy bay mare, her coat dusty from travel, her breathing indicating a journey of several miles rather than a desperate sprint. The rider sat easy in the saddle, suggesting familiarity with long hours on horseback. Owen made his way to the inn's front door, a heavy oak affair reinforced with iron bands and fitted with a lock that, while rarely used, spoke to the security that travelers valued. He opened the door as the rider drew rein in the small courtyard before the inn, noting, with an innkeeper's practiced eye, the details that would tell him something about his visitor's needs. The messenger, for such, he clearly was by his travel-stained leather jerkin and the sealed pouch at his side, appeared to be perhaps 20 years old. His boots bore the particular pattern of mud that came from crossing the ford at Wickham Bridge, suggesting he had ridden from the north. His cloak, though well-made, showed the dust and wear of someone who spent more days in the saddle than sleeping in a proper bed. Most telling of all, his mare stood with the patient, ground-eating stance of a horse accustomed to long journeys, her head lowered but alert, her breathing already beginning to slow. "Good afternoon to you, master," the young man called, swinging down from the saddle with fluid ease. "Would you be the keeper of this inn?" "I am Owen Blackthorne, and this is the Hearthstone Inn," Owen replied, stepping forward to steady the mare's bridle. "You and your horse look as though you could both benefit from rest and refreshment." The messenger's face, dusty and travel-worn, broke into a grateful smile. "Your reputation for hospitality precedes you, Master Blackthorne. I bear a message that I think will be of interest to you." He reached into the leather pouch at his side and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, its surface cream-colored and smooth, sealed with a blob of red wax that bore the impression of a merchant's ring. Owen accepted the parchment with the careful attention he gave to all such communications. The paper itself spoke of quality, not the rough, fibrous parchment used for everyday correspondence, but the fine-grained material that wealthy merchants used for important business. The wax seal was clean and unbroken, pressed with a design that showed scales of justice flanked by stylized coins, the mark of the Merchants' Guild of Canterbury. Breaking the seal with his thumbnail, Owen unfolded the parchment carefully. The scent that rose from the paper was faintly pleasant, a mixture of good ink, careful storage, and the subtle perfume that came from being kept in chests lined with cedar wood. The writing was clear and precise, formed with the careful hand of someone accustomed to preparing important documents. To the keeper of the Hearthstone Inn, the message began, "Greetings and good health. This missive serves to request lodging for a company of merchants traveling the Canterbury Road. We number 8 souls in total, with 4 wagons and 12 horses. We anticipate arriving at your establishment before the evening meal, and would be grateful for such accommodations as you might provide. Payment will be rendered according to your customary rates. We remain your servants in trade, Guildmaster Thomas of Canterbury." Owen read the message twice, his mind automatically beginning the calculations that such a request required. 8 travelers would need 8 beds, or 7 beds, if any were married couples sharing chambers. The inn had 7 guest rooms of varying sizes, from the simple pilgrims' chambers with their narrow beds and basic furnishings to the more spacious merchant suites with their writing desks and comfortable chairs. 12 horses would fit comfortably in his stable, which could accommodate up to 15 animals without crowding. 4 wagons would require space in the courtyard, but there was ample room if they were arranged with care. The rates mentioned in the letter would be 2 silver pieces per room for the night, including the evening meal and morning breakfast. For a company of merchants traveling under guild auspices, Owen might also provide small services: secure storage for valuable goods, hot water for washing, and the kind of careful attention to detail that encouraged travelers to speak well of the inn in other towns and cities. "Tell me," Owen said to the young messenger, "what manner of weather have you encountered on the road? And have you seen signs of other travelers who might be seeking lodging tonight?" The messenger accepted a pewter tankard of small beer that Owen had fetched from the common room, drinking gratefully before answering. The beer was Owen's own brewing, light and refreshing, with just enough fermentation to make it safer than water, flavored with herbs from his own garden. It was the kind of drink that refreshed without dulling the mind, perfect for travelers who still had miles to cover. "The weather has been fair, master, though there are clouds building to the west that suggest rain before morning. As for other travelers, I passed a party of pilgrims about an hour's ride south, perhaps 6 or 8 souls, traveling on foot and seeking a place to spend the night. They appeared to be honest folk, well dressed enough to pay for proper lodging." Owen nodded thoughtfully, his mental preparations already beginning. If the pilgrims arrived as well, he would need to arrange sleeping space in the common room for some of them, or perhaps offer the stable loft with fresh straw and warm blankets. The Hearthstone had a reputation for never turning away honest travelers, regardless of their ability to pay premium rates. The messenger finished his beer and moved to check his horse, running knowing hands along her legs and examining her hooves with the care of someone who understood that his livelihood depended on his mount's soundness. Owen watched this process with approval, recognizing a fellow craftsman in the young man's attention to detail. "She's a good mare," Owen observed, offering a bucket of fresh water drawn from the inn's well. "Sturdy bone, good depth of chest, bred for the road rather than for show." "Aye, she's carried me faithfully for 3 years now," the messenger replied, allowing the mare to drink her fill. "Never lame, never sick, never refuses a ford or balks at a strange inn. Worth her weight in silver to a man in my trade." Owen brought a measure of oats mixed with bran, watching with satisfaction as the mare ate with delicate greed. There was something deeply pleasing about providing for both human and animal needs, the fundamental hospitality that made civilization possible in a world where travel was often dangerous and always uncertain. As the messenger prepared to continue his journey, Owen felt the familiar stirring of anticipation that came with the promise of a busy evening. The inn would come alive tonight with conversation, good food, and the particular warmth that arose when strangers gathered around a common hearth. It was what he lived for, the transformation of his quiet haven into a bustling center of human fellowship. The afternoon light was beginning to shift from gold to amber, and there was work to be done. Chapter 3. Inventory and Preparation. With the messenger's hoofbeats fading into the distance, Owen turned his attention to the systematic preparation that would transform the Hearthstone from its afternoon quiet into an establishment ready to welcome a full complement of guests. This was work that required both methodical attention and the kind of deep knowledge that came only from years of experience, knowing not just what needed to be done, but the precise order and timing that would ensure everything came together perfectly when the first travelers arrived at his door. He began, as he always did, with a complete tour of the guest quarters. The inn's 7 chambers, each possessed its own character, developed over the years through Owen's careful attention to the needs of different types of travelers. Climbing the narrow wooden stairs, their steps worn smooth by countless feet and polished to a warm patina, Owen felt the building settle around him with small creaks and sighs that spoke of solid construction and honest age. The first chamber he entered was what he privately called the Rosemary Room, though he had never hung a formal sign with that name. The chamber faced east, catching the morning sun through windows fitted with oiled linen rather than expensive glass. From the oak rafters hung carefully tied bundles of dried herbs, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for peace, thyme for courage, and mint for hospitality. The scents blended together into a fragrance that was both soothing and invigorating, one that many travelers mentioned with pleasure when they spoke of their stay at the Hearthstone. Owen examined the bed with critical eyes. The frame was solid oak, joined with wooden pegs rather than metal fastenings, built to last generations rather than years. The rope supports beneath the mattress needed tightening. He could tell by the slight sag in the center where countless bodies had found rest. Using the wooden key kept beside the bed, he worked his way around the frame, tightening each section of rope until the support was firm and even. The mattress itself was stuffed with clean straw, replaced every few months to ensure freshness and comfort. Over it lay a feather tick, not the luxury of pure goose down that might be found in a noble household, but good duck feathers mixed with clean straw, providing softness while maintaining the firm support that prevented aches and pains. The pillow, too, was stuffed with feathers, covered in linen that had been washed so many times. It had achieved the particular softness that only came from years of careful use. Moving to the next chamber, Owen entered what he thought of as the merchant's suite. This room was larger, fitted with a writing desk of dark oak, where traveling merchants could attend to their correspondence and record their transactions. An inkwell of hammered brass sat ready, along with a selection of good quills and a small knife for trimming them to proper points. The shelves held several leather-bound ledger books, not for his guests' use, but as props that suggested the kind of serious commercial atmosphere that merchants appreciated. The bed in this room was the finest in the inn, fitted with a mattress that was more feather than straw and covered with woolen blankets dyed a rich blue with woad grown in local fields. The window looked out over the courtyard, allowing guests to keep watch over their wagons and horses, a consideration that merchants valued highly when carrying valuable goods. In the third chamber, the Pilgrim's Rest, Owen found evidence that his most recent guests had appreciated his attention to their spiritual needs. Simple wooden crosses hung on the walls, carved from apple wood and polished smooth. A small prayer book in Latin lay open on the bedside table, its pages illuminated with simple but beautiful designs in red and blue ink. The floor was covered with woven rush mats that were replaced regularly, providing warmth underfoot and a clean surface for the morning prayers that many pilgrims offered before beginning their day's journey. Each chamber received Owen's complete attention. He checked the oil levels in the bronze lamps that provided evening light, trimming wicks to ensure they would burn without smoke. The clay wash basins were examined for cracks and filled with fresh water from the well. Clean linen towels, worn soft from repeated washing and sun-drying, were folded and placed beside each basin. The linen closet at the end of the corridor held Owen's pride in housekeeping. Shelves of sweet elderwood supported neat stacks of sheets, pillowcases, and blankets, all organized by size and quality. The linen itself told the story of the inn's prosperity. Some pieces were fine enough to have come from Flemish looms, their weave tight and smooth, while others were the honest product of local spinners and weavers, rougher in texture but sturdy and warm. Between each layer of linens, Owen had placed small cloth bags filled with dried herbs from his garden. Lavender predominated, providing a scent that moths disliked and humans found soothing. But there was also dried rosemary to prevent mustiness, and small bags of crushed thyme that helped keep the linens fresh and sweet-smelling. Moving systematically through his inventory, Owen counted sheets, 24 of various sizes and qualities, and noted that several would need attention from martyr's needle, where seams had begun to separate from repeated washing. Pillowcases numbered 18, including several of particularly fine linen that he reserved for guests who clearly possessed the means to appreciate such touches. The woolen blankets required different care than the linens. Made from the fleece of local sheep and woven on looms in Millbrook, they possessed the particular quality of English wool, warm even when damp, sturdy enough to last for decades, and soft enough to provide comfort without irritation. Owen examined each blanket for signs of moth damage or excessive wear, finding them all in good condition, thanks to his practice of airing them regularly and storing them with aromatic herbs. In the largest chamber, the traveler's hall, which could accommodate up to 4 guests in separate beds, Owen found everything in perfect order. This room served families traveling together or groups of pilgrims who preferred shared accommodations to reduce their costs. The beds were simpler than those in the private chambers, with straw mattresses and horsehair pillows, but the linens were just as clean, and the attention to detail just as careful. As he worked his way through each room, Owen felt the deep satisfaction that came from competent preparation. Each chamber would welcome its guests with clean beds, fresh water, adequate lighting, and the subtle touches that transformed mere shelter into genuine hospitality. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to approve of his work, casting warm patterns across floors that had been swept clean and furniture that had been polished to a gentle shine. By the time he had completed his circuit of the guest quarters, Owen's mental list of evening tasks had crystallized into a plan that would unfold with the precision of long practice. Beds would be made with fresh linens, lamps would be filled and trimmed, and each chamber would receive the final touches that made the Hearthstone Inn a place that travelers remembered with gratitude long after their journeys had ended. The sun outside had shifted perceptibly toward the west, and Owen could feel the subtle change in the air that presaged evening's approach. Soon, the courtyard would echo with the sounds of arrival, and his careful preparations would be put to their intended use. Chapter 4. The Pantry and Provisions. The stone steps leading down to the inn's pantry were worn smooth by decades of use, their edges rounded by the passage of countless feet carrying supplies to and from the storage chambers below. Owen descended carefully, one hand trailing along the stone wall for balance, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light that filtered through small windows set high in the thick walls. The air here was noticeably cooler than in the main inn, and carried with it the complex scent of properly stored provisions, a mixture of dried herbs, aged cheese, cured meats, and the clean earthiness of root vegetables stored in sand. The pantry had been carved into the hillside when the inn was first built, taking advantage of the natural cooling properties of earth and stone. The temperature remained remarkably constant throughout the year, cool enough to preserve food safely, but not so cold as to freeze the ale or turn butter rancid. Owen had often reflected that this underground chamber was perhaps the most valuable part of his entire establishment, making possible the kind of reliable food service that kept travelers coming back to the Hearthstone year after year. Against the eastern wall, massive oak shelves held wheels of cheese in various stages of aging. The largest wheels were of hard cheese made from cow's milk, their rinds darkened with age, and their centers promising the sharp, complex flavors that came only from patient maturation. Smaller wheels of soft cheese, wrapped in cloth, awaited more immediate consumption, while rounds of fresh cheese, made just days ago by the dairy farmer who supplied the inn, sat ready for tonight's meal. Owen selected one of the medium wheels, testing its firmness with gentle pressure and noting with satisfaction the slight give that indicated perfect ripeness. This cheese would slice cleanly and melt beautifully when placed near the fire, providing the rich, satisfying taste that complemented fresh bread and made simple fare into a memorable meal. Hanging from iron hooks driven into the stone ceiling were braids of onions, their papery skins rustling softly as Owen moved between them. These had been harvested from his own garden in late summer and braided by Marta with the skill of someone who had learned the art as a girl. The onions ranged from small, sweet bulbs, perfect for eating raw, to large, sharp specimens that would add depth and flavor to stews and roasted meats. Owen selected several of the medium-sized onions, their skins crackling under his fingers as he tested them for firmness and freedom from rot. The barrels along the western wall contained the preserved meats that formed the backbone of the inn's hearty fare. One barrel held salt pork, the meat packed in coarse salt and herbs to prevent spoilage while maintaining flavor. Another contained smoked ham, the pieces dark and aromatic from their time in the smokehouse behind the inn. A third barrel held strips of dried beef, prepared according to a recipe that Owen had learned from a former soldier who had stayed at the inn years ago and paid for his lodging by sharing the knowledge of how armies kept meat edible during long campaigns. Owen lifted the wooden lid of the salt pork barrel, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of properly cured meat. The salt had drawn out the moisture that would allow decay, while the herbs, bay leaves, peppercorns, and dried thyme had added flavors that would make the pork delicious when it was finely cooked. He selected several pieces, each one firm and well marbled, perfect for adding richness to the evening's stew. In the corner designated for grain storage, large sacks of barley and oats leaned against the stone walls. These had been purchased directly from local farmers after the harvest, ensuring both freshness and the best possible price. The barley was destined for brewing. Owen made his own ale using methods passed down through generations of innkeepers, while the oats served both as food for horses and as an ingredient in the hearty porridge that began each day for guests and staff alike. Owen scooped up a wooden bowl of barley, letting the grains run through his fingers as he checked for signs of weevils or moisture damage. The grain was clean and dry, with the faint sweet scent that indicated proper storage and freedom from decay. He filled a smaller container with the amount needed for tonight's stew, where the barley would absorb the flavors of meat and vegetables, while providing the substantial nourishment that travelers required. Moving deeper into the pantry, Owen reached the section where root vegetables were stored in wooden boxes filled with clean sand. Carrots lay buried in neat rows, their tops removed, but their orange bodies as crisp and sweet as the day they had been pulled from the earth. Turnips nestled in their own sandy beds, while parsnips waited pale and ready to add their distinctive sweetness to winter stews. The sand storage method was one that Owen had learned from his predecessor, an old innkeeper who had taught him that vegetables could be kept fresh for months if properly buried in clean, dry sand that allowed them to breathe while preventing moisture loss. It was more work than simply storing vegetables in baskets, but the results, crisp, flavorful vegetables available throughout the winter months, justified the extra effort. Owen selected carrots, turnips, and parsnips for the evening's meal, brushing away the sand and examining each vegetable for firmness and quality. These would be chopped and added to the stew, where their natural sugars would balance the saltiness of the preserved meat and create the complex, satisfying flavors that made simple fare into comfort food. The bread for tonight's meal had been begun that morning, following the rhythm that Owen had maintained for years. The large wooden bowls, where the dough had risen twice, sat empty now, their contents transformed into loaves that were even now cooling on wooden racks in the kitchen above. But Owen took a moment to examine the remaining flour, stored in wooden barrels with tight-fitting lids that kept out moisture and vermin. The flour came from grain ground at the mill beside the stream that powered its great stone wheels. Owen could tell good flour by its texture and color, fine enough to make bread that rose properly. but with enough of the grain's natural oils remaining to provide flavor and nutrition. He scooped up a handful, rubbing it between his fingers to check for the proper consistency, and found it exactly as it should be. In the section devoted to brewing supplies, Owen checked the status of his ale production. Several wooden casks sat in various stages of fermentation, from the newest batch that still bubbled quietly as the yeast converted grain sugars into alcohol, to the mature ale that was ready for immediate consumption. He drew a small sample from one of the ready casks, tasting it with the critical palate of someone who understood that good ale was as important to an inn's reputation as comfortable beds. The ale was perfect, clear and golden, with a clean taste that spoke of quality ingredients and careful brewing. It was strong enough to be nourishing and safe to drink, but not so strong as to cloud judgment or loosen tongues inappropriately. The gentle bitterness of hops balanced the sweetness of malted grain, creating the kind of drink that complemented food without overwhelming it. Owen selected 2 clay jugs and filled them with ale for the evening service, noting with satisfaction the way the liquid poured smoothly without excessive foam, a sign that the fermentation had proceeded properly, and the ale had been given sufficient time to clarify. These jugs would be carried upstairs and kept ready beside the hearth, where the warmth would bring out the ale's full flavor just as the first guests began to arrive. As he made his way back through the pantry, Owen felt the deep satisfaction that came from abundance properly managed. Every shelf, every barrel, every storage container represented not just food and drink, but the security that allowed him to welcome travelers without concern for whether his stores would be adequate to their needs. This abundance was the foundation of true hospitality, the ability to provide not just sufficiency, but genuine plenty that made guests feel valued and cared for. The stone steps seemed easier on the way up, perhaps because his arms were full of the evening's ingredients, perhaps because his mind was already moving ahead to the next phase of preparation. Above him, he could hear the familiar sounds of the inn preparing for evening, Marta's movements in the kitchen, the settling of the building as the day's heat began to give way to cooler air, and the distant sound of church bells marking the passage of time toward the busy hours ahead. Chapter 5. Tending the Hearth. Returning to the common room with his arms full of provisions, Owen felt the familiar pleasure of seeing his domain bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The sun, now noticeably lower in the western sky, streamed through the diamond-paned windows at a sharper angle, creating geometric patterns of light and shadow across the worn wooden floor. Dust motes danced in the illuminated air, and Nutmeg had shifted her position on the blue wool cushion to maintain her perfect balance between fire warmth and solar heat. The great hearth stood ready for Owen's attention, its bed of carefully banked coals now settled into the steady glow that indicated perfect readiness for the evening fire. This was the heart of the inn in more ways than one, not just the source of heat and light, but the focal point around which all the evening's activities would revolve. Travelers would gather here to warm themselves, share their stories, and partake of the food and fellowship that transformed a simple commercial transaction into something approaching genuine communion. Owen set down his provisions on the nearest table and turned his full attention to the ancient ritual of fire building. Though he had performed this task thousands of times, he never approached it carelessly or allowed it to become merely automatic. Fire was too important, too central to human civilization and comfort to be treated with anything less than the respect it deserved. From the wood box beside the hearth, Owen selected pieces of kindling with the same attention that a craftsman might give to choosing tools for a delicate task. The best kindling came from split pine, its resin-rich wood catching easily and burning hot enough to ignite larger pieces. But pine burned quickly and could create excessive smoke, so it needed to be balanced with kindling from hardwoods, split oak and maple that would burn more slowly and provide a stable foundation for the main fire. The pieces Owen chose ranged from finger-thick splits that would catch almost instantly to wrist-thick sections that would sustain the flame long enough to ignite the larger logs. Each piece was dry, seasoned for at least a year in the woodshed, where rain could not reach it, but air could circulate freely. The wood felt light in his hands, and when struck together, produced the sharp, ringing sound that indicated moisture had been properly removed. Beginning with the smallest pieces, Owen arranged his kindling in a careful pattern over the bed of coals. The arrangement needed to allow air to flow freely, while ensuring that each piece would ignite from its neighbors in sequence. Too tight, and the fire would smother from lack of oxygen. Too loose, and the flames would not spread properly from piece to piece. The skill lay in finding the exact balance that would produce a fire that grew steadily and evenly. From the coals below, Owen could see the first tiny flames beginning to lick at the resinous wood of the pine kindling. The flames were pale in the bright afternoon light, almost invisible except for the slight shimmer they produced in the air above them. But Owen could feel their heat on his face and hands, and more importantly, he could hear the subtle crackling sound that indicated the fire was taking hold properly. As the kindling caught and began to burn with steady flames, Owen reached for the larger pieces of wood that would form the main body of the evening fire. Here, his choice was deliberate and based on years of experience with the burning characteristics of different woods. Oak formed the foundation, dense, heavy logs that would burn slowly and steadily, providing consistent heat for hours. But oak could be difficult to ignite, so Owen interspersed it with pieces of ash and maple, woods that caught more easily and burned with clean, bright flames. The logs he selected had been split the previous autumn during the season when such work was most pleasant and the wood's moisture content was at its lowest. Each log bore the marks of his axe, clean splits that revealed the pale heartwood beneath dark bark, surfaces that would catch fire readily once the flames reached them. The wood was heavy with stored energy, ready to release the summer sunlight it had captured during years of patient growth. Owen arranged the logs with the same care he had given to the kindling, creating a structure that would burn from the bottom up while maintaining its integrity long enough to establish a proper fire. The largest logs went on the bottom, resting on the iron fire dogs that held them above the coals and allowed air to circulate underneath. Smaller pieces were laid across these in a loose lattice pattern, with the smallest logs on top, where they would catch first and help ignite the larger pieces below. The fire dogs themselves were works of functional art, iron pieces forged by the blacksmith in Millbrook, shaped like sleeping hounds with their heads resting on their paws. They had been made specifically for the Hearthstone's great fireplace, sized to support even the largest logs while allowing optimal airflow. Their iron surfaces showed the dark patina that came from years of contact with fire, but their structure remained sound and true. As Owen worked, he was aware of the gradual change taking place in the fire itself. What had begun as tiny flames licking at pine kindling was growing into a proper blaze, with bright yellow and orange flames beginning to dance among the larger pieces of wood. The fire was finding its own rhythm now, drawing air from the room through the carefully constructed arrangement of fuel, heating the chimney to create the draft that would sustain it through the evening hours. The transformation was both rapid and gradual, rapid in that the flames spread visibly from piece to piece, gradual in that the fire's character developed slowly from the quick, bright burning of kindling to the steady, substantial burning of hardwood. Owen could hear the difference in the sound as much as see it in the flames. The sharp crackling of pine gave way to the deeper, more resonant sounds of oak beginning to release its stored energy. With the main fire well established, Owen turned his attention to the iron pot that would hold the evening's stew. The pot was a substantial piece of equipment, forged from iron and shaped to distribute heat evenly while retaining it efficiently. Its 3 legs allowed it to sit securely among the burning logs, while its heavy lid would trap moisture and flavors during the slow cooking process that would transform simple ingredients into satisfying fare. Owen filled the pot with water from the wooden bucket beside the hearth, then carefully arranged it among the burning logs where it would receive steady heat without being overwhelmed by direct flame. The water would come to a slow boil, ready to receive the meat and vegetables that would form the basis of the evening's main dish. As the fire settled into its evening rhythm, Owen took a moment to appreciate the scene he had created. The flames danced with hypnotic beauty, casting moving shadows on the stone walls of the fireplace and filling the common room with the warm, flickering light that electric lamps, no matter how bright, could never duplicate. The scent of burning wood mingled with the faint aromas of cooking that drifted from the kitchen, creating the distinctive atmosphere that travelers associated with welcome and comfort. Nutmeg opened both eyes to observe the renewed fire, seemed to approve of Owen's work, and stretched luxuriously before settling back into her afternoon repose. The flames reflected in her amber eyes, and her purring added a contented undertone to the gentle crackling of the fire. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning its gradual transition toward evening, and Owen knew that soon the road would bring the travelers whose needs his careful preparations were designed to meet. The fire would be ready to welcome them, its light and warmth serving as the first gesture of the hospitality that would make their stay at the Hearthstone Inn a memory worth treasuring. Chapter 6. The Stable and Courtyard. As shadows began to lengthen across the inn's courtyard, Owen made his way towards the stable yard, his practiced eye automatically assessing the preparations needed to accommodate the merchant caravan and their horses. The stable formed the eastern boundary of the inn's property, a long, low building of the same honey-colored stone and dark timber construction as the inn itself. Its design spoke of thoughtful planning, built to house up to 15 animals comfortably, with individual stalls sized for everything from sturdy cart horses to the finer riding mounts that merchants favored for their personal use. The familiar sense of the stable greeted Owen as he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Here was the complex perfume of horses at rest, the sweet smell of clean hay, the earthy aroma of fresh straw bedding, the reassuring scent of well-maintained leather tack, and underlying it, all the warm animal smell of horses themselves. Not unpleasant when the stable was properly managed, but rather comforting in its suggestion of life and energy temporarily at rest. Owen began his systematic inspection with the stalls themselves, checking each one with the thoroughness that years of experience had taught him was necessary. The wooden partitions between stalls were solid oak, built to withstand the occasional kick or bite from animals that might not get along perfectly. Each stall gate hung straight on its iron hinges and latched securely. Important considerations when dealing with valuable animals that their owners could not afford to lose. The first stall held fresh straw bedding that Owen had laid down just that morning, golden wheat straw that provided both comfort and cleanliness. The straw was dry and sweet-smelling, free of mold or dust that might cause respiratory problems in the animals that would occupy the stall. Owen scattered it evenly with a wooden fork, ensuring that it provided adequate cushioning while remaining loose enough to absorb moisture effectively. Moving to the next stall, Owen checked the water trough, a long wooden container lined with pitch to prevent leakage. The water was clean and fresh, drawn from the same well that served the inn itself. Owen tested the depth with his hand, ensuring that even large horses would be able to drink comfortably without straining their necks. The water level needed to be substantial enough to serve multiple animals throughout the night, but not so full as to splash over the edges when the horses drank. Each stall was equipped with a hay net suspended from iron hooks driven into the wooden frame. Owen filled these nets with sweet meadow hay that had been cut from his own fields during the late summer. The hay retained its green color and fresh scent, indicating that it had been properly dried and stored without exposure to rain or excessive moisture. A horse could work steadily for hours on a stomach full of good hay, and Owen took pride in providing feed that would restore the animal's energy for the next day's travel. The process of preparing each stall was meditative in its repetition, yet required constant attention to detail. Straw needed to be distributed evenly, water levels checked and adjusted, hay nets filled to the proper capacity. Owen moved through these tasks with the rhythm of long practice, his hands performing familiar motions, while his mind planned the logistics of accommodating 12 horses of unknown temperament and size. In the tack room adjacent to the main stable, Owen reviewed his supply of additional equipment that might be needed. Spare halters hung from wooden pegs, ready to replace any that might break during the night. Lead ropes were coiled and ready for use. A collection of brushes and curry combs stood ready for guests who might wish to groom their own animals or who needed equipment to replace pieces lost or damaged during travel. The tool shed attached to the stable held the implements necessary for proper horse care. Owen checked his supply of hoof picks, essential tools for removing stones and debris that could lame a valuable animal. Clean cloth for wiping down sweaty horses filled a wooden box, while a collection of blankets stood ready to provide warmth for animals that might have become chilled during evening travel. Moving outside to the courtyard itself, Owen surveyed the open space where the merchants' wagons would spend the night. The courtyard was paved with flat stones fitted together with the skill of craftsmen who understood that a level surface was essential for the proper support of heavily loaded vehicles. Between the stones, small channels allowed rainwater to drain away rather than pooling where it might soften wheel rims or create muddy conditions. The stone-lined well that served both inn and stable occupied the center of the courtyard, its wooden windlass and rope in perfect working order. Owen drew up a bucket of water, testing its clarity and taste with the attention of someone who understood that water quality could mean the difference between healthy animals and sick ones. The water was cold and sweet, drawn from a deep source that remained uncontaminated by surface runoff. Around the perimeter of the courtyard, iron rings set into the stone walls provided secure points for tethering animals that needed to be kept separate from the main group. These rings were positioned at the proper height and spacing to prevent horses from interfering with each other, while allowing them adequate room to move and graze if hay was provided on the ground. Owen spread fresh sawdust along the main pathways through the stable, creating surfaces that would absorb moisture and provide secure footing for both horses and humans moving through the area after dark. The sawdust came from the mill at Millbrook, a byproduct of lumber production that served perfectly for stable maintenance. It was clean and dry, free of splinters or debris that might injure sensitive hooves or bare feet. As he worked, Owen became aware of the sounds that surrounded the stable area. Swallows nested in the eaves above, their soft chirping providing a peaceful background to his activities. From the fields beyond the inn's boundaries came the distant lowing of cattle being brought in for evening milking, a sound that spoke of the agricultural rhythm that governed rural life. The church bells of Millbrook chimed the hour across the countryside, their bronze voices marking the passage of time toward evening. 5 bells, 5 hours past noon. Soon the sun would begin its more rapid descent toward the western horizon, and the first travelers might appear on the road from either direction. Owen paused in his work to appreciate the scene he had prepared. The stable stood ready to welcome a dozen horses with comfortable stalls, clean bedding, fresh water, and abundant hay. The courtyard provided secure parking for 4 wagons, with easy access to the well and clear pathways to both inn and stable. Every detail had been attended to, every preparation made with the care that marked the difference between adequate service and genuine hospitality. A gentle breeze stirred the evening air, carrying with it the sense of approaching twilight, cooling earth, growing grass, and the faint smoke from chimneys where other households were beginning their own evening preparations. Owen breathed deeply of this complex perfume, feeling the satisfaction that came from work well done and preparations properly completed. The stable and courtyard were ready. Soon enough, they would be tested by the arrival of tired horses and grateful travelers, and Owen was confident that both animals and humans would find exactly what they needed for a night of comfortable rest. Chapter 7. The Kitchen's Evening Rhythm. The kitchen of the Hearthstone Inn occupied the ground floor of the building's northern wing, positioned to catch the morning light while remaining cool during the heat of summer afternoons. As Owen made his way from the stable yard, he could already hear the familiar sounds of evening food preparation, the steady rhythm of knife on cutting board, the gentle bubbling of pots on the fire, and the quiet humming that meant Marta was pleased with her work. Marta had served as the inn's cook and housekeeper for nearly 15 years, arriving as a young widow with excellent references and staying to become as essential to the Hearthstone's operation as Owen himself. She possessed that rare combination of skills that marked the truly gifted cook, an intuitive understanding of how flavors worked together, the organizational ability to prepare multiple dishes simultaneously, and the temperament to remain calm and efficient even when faced with unexpected demands. This evening, with the prospect of 8 additional guests to feed, Marta had transformed the kitchen into a model of controlled activity. Every surface held ingredients in various stages of preparation, yet nothing appeared hurried or disorganized. This was the kitchen rhythm at its finest. Multiple processes unfolding simultaneously, each at its own pace, yet all timed to converge at the precise moment when food needed to be served. "Good evening, Marta," Owen said as he entered the kitchen, carrying with him the vegetables and meat he had selected from the pantry. "I trust you received word about our expected guests." Marta looked up from the cutting board, where she had been reducing onions to precise, uniform pieces. Her hands never stopped moving, but her smile was warm and genuine. "Indeed I did, Master Owen. And I must say, it's a pleasure to have the chance to cook for a proper company again. The inn has been too quiet these past weeks." The cutting board itself was a masterpiece of functional carpentry. A single piece of oak, seasoned for years until it had achieved the perfect density and smoothness. Its surface was worn into gentle concavities, where thousands of hours of chopping had shaped it to the contours of the work performed upon it. The knife Marta wielded was equally impressive, its carbon steel blade honed to razor sharpness, and its wooden handle polished smooth by years of careful use. Owen watched with appreciation as Marta's knife work continued. Each cut was precise and deliberate, producing onion pieces of identical size that would cook evenly and contribute uniform flavor to the evening stew. This was the mark of a truly skilled cook, not just the ability to prepare food that tasted good, but the understanding that consistency in technique produced consistency in results. "What have you planned for our merchant friends?" Owen asked, beginning to arrange his own contributions to the meal on the wooden counter that ran along the kitchen's eastern wall. "The usual welcomes," Marta replied, her knife now moving to a collection of carrots that would join the onions in the great iron pot. "Good bread. The loaves came from the oven just an hour ago, and they're perfect. Stew with the salt pork and barley you've brought. Plenty of vegetables to make it hearty. Cheese from our best wheel. Ale from the cask that's been aging since spring. And perhaps some of the honey cakes I made yesterday, if our guests prove to have a sweet tooth." The bread she mentioned sat cooling on wooden racks near the kitchen's great hearth, and Owen could see that her assessment was accurate. The loaves were perfectly formed, their crusts golden brown, and their surfaces showing the slight crackling that indicated proper baking. When cut, he knew the bread would reveal a texture that was substantial enough to satisfy hunger, while remaining light enough to complement rather than compete with other flavors. The process of bread making at the Hearthstone followed traditions that stretched back generations. The starter that gave the bread its distinctive flavor had been maintained continuously for over 20 years, fed regularly with flour and water to keep the wild yeasts active and healthy. Each batch of bread began with a portion of this starter, ensuring continuity of flavor, while allowing for the subtle variations that made each day's baking slightly different from the last. Owen began preparing the vegetables he had brought from the pantry, working alongside Marta with the easy cooperation that came from years of shared labor. His knife work, while competent, lacked the effortless precision of Marta's professional technique, but he understood his role in the kitchen's hierarchy and was content to provide steady, reliable assistance rather than attempt to match her expertise. The carrots he chopped would add both sweetness and color to the stew, their natural sugars caramelizing during the long, slow cooking process to create layers of flavor that transformed simple ingredients into something memorable. The turnips provided a different kind of sweetness, earthier and more substantial, while the parsnips contributed a distinctive flavor that many travelers found exotic and appealing. As they worked, the great iron pot that Owen had positioned over the fire began to show signs of readiness. Steam rose steadily from its surface, and the water within had achieved the gentle, rolling boil that would properly cook the tough fibers of salt pork while extracting maximum flavor from the preserved meat. Marta added the meat to the pot with the careful attention of someone who understood that timing was everything in successful cooking. The salt pork needed to cook longer than the vegetables to become tender, but not so long that it would fall apart and lose its texture. She stirred the pot with a long wooden spoon, its handle darkened by years of contact with cooking fires, its bowl worn smooth by countless hours of stirring. The kitchen's atmosphere was filled with the sounds and scents of serious cooking. The steady bubbling of the stew pot provided a rhythmic background, while the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of knife work created a symphony of productivity. The aromas were equally complex. The savory smell of cooking meat, the sweet scent of caramelizing vegetables, and the yeasty perfume of cooling bread all mingled into a fragrance that spoke of nourishment and care. Owen found himself falling into the meditative rhythm that kitchen work could provide. There was something deeply satisfying about the transformation of raw ingredients into prepared food, something that connected him to the fundamental human activities that made civilization possible. The act of feeding others, of transforming simple materials into sustenance that would restore energy and provide pleasure, felt like participation in something larger than mere commercial hospitality. As the evening progressed and the stew began to develop its full flavor, Marta turned her attention to the final preparations that would complete the meal. She arranged trenchers, thick slices of day-old bread that would serve as plates, on wooden serving boards, their surfaces slightly hollowed from repeated use. These trenchers would absorb the stew's flavorful juices while providing additional substance to the meal. The cheese Owen had selected from the pantry received Marta's critical examination before being cut into generous portions and arranged on wooden platters. The aged cheese had developed a complex flavor that would complement the hearty stew while providing a different texture and taste to round out the meal. Alongside it, she placed portions of fresh butter, churned just that morning from cream provided by the same dairy that supplied the inn's cheese. Clay jugs stood ready to be filled with ale from the casks Owen had tested in the pantry. The ale would be served at cellar temperature, cool enough to be refreshing, but not so cold as to mask its carefully developed flavors. Wooden cups, polished smooth by years of use, waited in neat rows to be filled and carried to the common room where hungry travelers would soon gather around the great hearth. The kitchen's evening rhythm was approaching its crescendo, with all the various preparations converging towards the moment when food would be served. Owen felt the familiar anticipation that preceded the transformation of his quiet inn into a bustling center of human fellowship. And he knew that the careful work he and Marta had performed would provide the foundation for an evening that guests would remember long after their journey's end. Chapter 8. Chambers Readied. With the kitchen preparations well in hand, Owen returned to the upper floors of the inn to complete the final preparations of the guest chambers. The late afternoon light streaming through the corridor windows had taken on the golden quality that presaged evening, casting long rectangles of warm illumination across the polished wooden floors. Each chamber awaited his attention, ready to be transformed from clean, empty spaces into welcoming havens for weary travelers. Owen began with the rosemary room, pushing open the oak door to admit the corridor's brighter light into the chamber's more subdued interior. The room faced east, which meant that by morning it would be flooded with sunshine. But now, in the late afternoon, it possessed a gentle, restful quality that many guests found conducive to peaceful sleep. The bed frame, constructed of solid oak and joined with wooden pegs in the old style, stood ready for Owen's attention. The rope supports that held the mattress had been checked and tightened during his earlier inspection. But now came the more particular work of making the bed properly for an arriving guest. From the linen closet, Owen selected sheets of fine linen, their weave tight enough to be smooth against the skin while remaining substantial enough to withstand repeated washing. These sheets told the story of the inn's commitment to quality, not the roughest cloth that would merely serve, but linens fine enough to provide genuine comfort. The fabric had been washed so many times that it had achieved the particular softness that came only from years of careful laundering. Yet it remained strong and free from thin spots or tears. Owen spread the bottom sheet across the straw mattress with practiced motions, ensuring that it lay flat and smooth without wrinkles that might disturb a sleeper's rest. The corners were tucked with military precision, creating a sleeping surface that would remain neat and comfortable throughout the night. Over this went the top sheet, folded down at the head to reveal the pillow and create an inviting entrance to the bed's comfort. The pillow itself required its own attention. Stuffed with duck feathers and covered in linen that matched the sheets, it needed to be fluffed and shaped to provide proper support for a traveler's head. Owen gave it several firm pats, redistributing the feathers within their linen case to create a pillow that was soft enough to be comfortable yet firm enough to provide adequate support for the neck and shoulders. The woolen blanket came next, a substantial piece woven from the fleece of local sheep and dyed a warm brown with oak bark and iron. The blanket was heavy enough to provide warmth on even the coolest nights, yet its weave allowed enough air circulation to prevent overheating. Owen arranged it carefully, ensuring that it would cover the sleeper adequately while remaining loose enough to allow easy movement during the night. Moving to the washstand, Owen filled the clay basin with fresh water drawn from the well. The water was cold and clear, perfect for the morning ablutions that travelers would perform before beginning their day's journey. Beside the basin, he placed a linen towel, worn soft from repeated use but clean and sweet-smelling from its recent washing and sun-drying. The oil lamp that would provide evening light required careful attention. Owen trimmed the wick to the proper length, ensuring that it would burn with a steady flame without smoking. The bronze lamp itself was polished to a warm glow, and its oil reservoir was filled with the clear, odorless oil that burned cleanly without leaving soot on the chamber's walls or ceiling. A small wooden box beside the bed held the flint and steel that would allow guests to light their lamp when darkness came. Owen tested the flint's spark, striking it against the steel to produce the shower of sparks that would ignite properly prepared tinder. Everything was in perfect working order, ready to provide light at the moment it was needed. The chamber pot, discreetly positioned beneath the bed but easily accessible, had been thoroughly cleaned and supplied with a tight-fitting lid that would prevent any unpleasant odors from disturbing the chamber's atmosphere. This was one of those details that separated good hospitality from merely adequate service. Attention to the practical necessities that guests required but preferred not to think about. Owen repeated this process in each of the 7 chambers, adjusting his preparations to match the character and expected occupants of each room. The merchant's suite received his finest linens and most careful attention to detail, while the simpler pilgrim's chambers were prepared with equal care, but with an emphasis on cleanliness and basic comfort rather than luxury. In the traveler's hall, which could accommodate up to 4 guests in separate beds, Owen faced the challenge of preparing multiple sleeping spaces while maintaining the room's sense of order and welcome. Each bed received the same careful attention: fresh straw mattresses, clean linens, properly fluffed pillows, and warm blankets. The room's larger size required additional oil lamps to ensure adequate lighting, and Owen positioned them strategically to provide good illumination while minimizing the risk of accident or fire. The merchant's suite required special attention to the writing desk that was one of its distinguishing features. Owen checked the brass inkwell, ensuring that it contained fresh ink and that the quills beside it were properly trimmed and ready for use. The small knife used for sharpening quills was sharp and clean, while the sand for blotting wet ink was dry and fine-grained. As he worked, Owen found himself thinking about the travelers who would soon occupy these carefully prepared chambers. Each room would become a temporary home for people far from their own beds, their own familiar surroundings. The care he put into these preparations was his way of extending a welcome that went beyond mere commercial transaction, an attempt to provide not just shelter, but genuine comfort and peace. The afternoon light continued its gradual shift toward evening as Owen completed his circuit of the chambers. Each room now stood ready to welcome its occupants with clean beds, fresh water, adequate lighting, and all the small touches that transformed mere accommodation into genuine hospitality. The beds were inviting, the atmosphere peaceful, and every practical need had been anticipated and provided for. Returning to the corridor, Owen took a moment to appreciate the scene he had created. 7 chambers, each unique in its character, but all sharing the common elements of cleanliness, comfort, and careful attention to detail. The wooden floors gleamed with polish. The walls were free of dust and cobwebs, and the air held the faint, pleasant scent of the dried herbs that Marta used in her cleaning preparations. Through the corridor windows, Owen could see that the sun was now noticeably lower in the western sky, and the quality of light suggested that evening was beginning its approach in earnest. Soon, the sound of wheels and hooves would announce the arrival of the merchant caravan, and his careful preparations would be put to their intended test. The chambers were ready. Each one offered a haven of comfort and rest, prepared with the kind of attention to detail that made travelers grateful for their choice of lodging. Owen felt the deep satisfaction that came from work well done, and he looked forward to seeing his guests' faces when they discovered the care that had been taken for their comfort. Chapter 9. The Caravan's Arrival. The first sound that announced the caravan's approach was not the rumble of wheels or the clip-clop of hooves, but rather the distant jingling of harness bells, small bronze bells attached to the horse's tack that served both to warn other travelers of their approach and to help keep the animals together during travel. Owen heard this sound while he was making his final inspection of the common room, and it brought with it the familiar stirring of anticipation that always accompanied the arrival of guests. Moving to one of the diamond-paned windows, Owen could see the caravan making its way along the packed earth road that led to the inn. 4 covered wagons, drawn by sturdy horses, approached in single file. Their canvas tops stretched tight over wooden hoops that protected their cargo from rain and dust. Alongside the wagons rode several mounted figures, the merchants themselves, Owen surmised, keeping watch over their valuable goods while maintaining the flexibility to scout ahead or handle problems that might arise during travel. Owen smoothed his leather apron and checked his appearance in the polished brass mirror that hung beside the inn's front door. His face showed the weathering that came from years of honest outdoor work, but his beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes held the steady, welcoming expression that travelers valued in an innkeeper. He looked like what he was, a man who could be trusted to provide fair value for fair payment, someone whose word was reliable and whose establishment would offer genuine comfort rather than mere adequacy. The lead wagon reached the inn's courtyard just as Owen stepped outside to greet his arriving guests. The driver was a middle-aged man whose careful handling of the reins and steady control of his horses marked him as someone experienced in the challenges of overland travel. His clothing was well-made but practical: leather jerkin, woolen hose, and a felt hat that showed signs of weather without appearing shabby or neglected. "Good evening," Owen called, raising his hand in the traditional gesture of peaceful welcome. "You'll be the merchant company that sent word ahead? I'm Owen Blackthorne, keeper of this inn, and you're most welcome to the Hearthstone." The lead merchant, for such he proved to be, returned Owen's greeting with obvious relief. His face showed the particular weariness that came from hours of responsibility for valuable cargo and the safety of traveling companions. And Owen could see in his eyes the gratitude that travelers felt when they reached a destination that promised genuine rest and security. The merchant replied, swinging down from his wagon seat with the careful movements of someone whose muscles had been strained by long hours of travel. "I am Thomas of Canterbury, guildmaster of the wool merchants, and these are my associates and guards. We are indeed grateful to find you ready to receive us." Owen moved forward to steady the merchant's horses, noting with an innkeeper's practiced eye the details that would tell him something about his guests' needs and expectations. The horses were tired but not exhausted, their breathing indicating a long day's travel, but nothing beyond their capacity. The wagons themselves were well maintained and valuable, their canvas covers protecting goods that were clearly worth the expense of careful transport. "Your rooms are prepared and waiting," Owen assured the guildmaster, "and your horses will find comfortable stalls with fresh straw and good hay. If you'll permit me, I'll help you with the arrangements while my people see to your animals' needs." The process of check-in unfolded with the smooth efficiency that Owen had perfected over years of practice. Each merchant was assigned to quarters appropriate to his station and means. Thomas himself to the merchant's suite, his senior associates to private chambers, and the younger men and guards to shared accommodations that provided comfort without unnecessary expense. As the merchants began unloading their personal belongings, Owen directed the care of their horses with the attention that valuable animals deserved. The 12 horses were led to the stable in small groups, their harness bells creating a gentle musical accompaniment to the evening's activities. Each animal was examined briefly for signs of lameness or injury, watered carefully to ensure they didn't drink too much too quickly, and provided with measured portions of oats mixed with bran to restore their energy without causing digestive problems. The stable yard came alive with the controlled activity of arrival. Merchants supervised the unhitching of their wagons. Guards saw to the security of valuable goods, and Owen moved among them all, ensuring that every need was anticipated and met. The atmosphere was one of relief and gratitude. The particular satisfaction that came to travelers who had completed a long day's journey and found themselves welcomed with competence and care. "Your reputation precedes you, Master Blackthorn," Thomas observed, as Owen helped him carry his personal pack toward the inn's entrance. "We were told in Canterbury that the Hearthstone offered the finest hospitality on the Pilgrim's Road, and I can already see that the reports were accurate." Owen felt the quiet pride that such compliments always brought, but his response was characteristically modest. "We do our best to make travelers comfortable, Master Thomas. A good night's rest and a proper meal can make all the difference to folks who spend their days on the road." Inside the inn, the common room had been transformed by the presence of guests. What had been a quiet, empty space just hours before now buzzed with the conversation and activity of 8 travel-weary men grateful to find themselves in comfortable surroundings. The great hearth, with its carefully built fire, provided both warmth and the kind of dancing light that made faces appear friendly and welcoming. Owen moved among his guests, ensuring that each man found his assigned chamber satisfactory and that any special needs were understood and addressed. The merchants, tired from their day's travel but pleased with their accommodations, began the process of settling in that marked the transition from journey to rest. Some chose to wash and change from their travel clothes before coming down to the common room for the evening meal. Others preferred to secure their most valuable possessions before relaxing their vigilance. All seemed pleased with the preparations that had been made for their comfort, and Owen heard the kind of satisfied comments that told him his attention to detail had been appreciated. As the sun continued its descent toward the western horizon, the inn's common room gradually filled with the pleasant sounds of travelers at ease. Conversations began tentatively, as strangers sized each other up, then grew more animated as the shared experience of travel created common ground for fellowship. The evening was unfolding exactly as Owen had hoped. Tired travelers finding comfort, good preparation, meeting genuine need, and the inn's reputation for hospitality being confirmed once again in the minds of guests who would carry word of their experience to other towns and cities along the trade routes. Soon, Marta would announce that the evening meal was ready, and the real business of hospitality would begin in earnest. Chapter 10. Evening Feast and Fellowship. As the last light of day faded from the diamond-paned windows, the common room of the Hearthstone Inn was transformed into a scene of medieval hospitality at its finest. The great hearth blazed with steady warmth, casting dancing shadows across the oak-beamed ceiling and illuminating the faces of 8 merchants who had found exactly the kind of welcome they had hoped for at the end of their long day's journey. Marta appeared from the kitchen, bearing the first of the evening's offerings. Wooden platters, laden with thick slices of bread that had been baked to perfection just hours before. The bread's crust crackled as she set it on the heavy oak table, releasing the yeasty aroma that spoke of grain properly fermented and ovens heated to exactly the right temperature. Alongside the bread came earthenware pots of fresh butter, churned that very morning, and still carrying the sweet taste of rich cream. Owen moved among his guests with clay jugs of ale, filling wooden cups with the golden brew that had been aging in his cellars since spring. The ale poured smoothly, creating a modest head of foam that dissipated quickly, the mark of proper fermentation and adequate aging. The merchants sampled it with the appreciation of men who understood the difference between good ale and merely adequate drink. "This is exceptional, Master Blackthorn," Thomas observed, raising his cup in a gesture of appreciation. "Clear and clean, with just the right balance of sweetness and bitter herbs. You brew this yourself?" Owen inclined his head modestly. "I do indeed, Master Thomas. The recipe came from my predecessor, but I've made small improvements over the years. The hops come from my own garden, and the water from our well has qualities that seem particularly suited to the brewing arts." The conversation that began with ale continued as Marta brought forth the evening's main course. The great iron pot that had simmered over the fire throughout the afternoon had worked its slow magic on simple ingredients, transforming salt pork, root vegetables, and barley into a stew that filled the common room with its rich, savory aroma. Marta ladled generous portions onto trenchers, thick slices of day-old bread that served as both plate and additional nourishment. The stew was thick enough to stay on the bread without running off the edges, yet liquid enough to soak into the trencher and create the kind of satisfying filling meal that travelers required after long hours on the road. The merchants fell to their food with the hearty appetite of men who had earned their meal through honest labor. The salt pork had become tender during its long cooking, its preserved saltiness balanced by the natural sweetness of carrots and parsnips. The barley had absorbed the flavors of meat and vegetables while providing the substantial texture that made the stew truly filling. "I must ask for this recipe," declared one of the younger merchants, a man whose appreciation for good food was evident in his enthusiastic consumption of the stew. "My wife prides herself on her cooking, but I've never tasted better than this." Marta, busy serving additional portions, smiled at the compliment. "The secret is in the long, slow cooking, young master. Patience is the most important ingredient in any stew. That and proper seasoning with herbs that complement rather than compete with the natural flavors." As the meal progressed, the atmosphere in the common room grew increasingly warm and convivial. The combination of good food, excellent ale, and comfortable surroundings worked its ancient magic on men who had spent the day dealing with the challenges and uncertainties of travel. Conversations that had begun with the formal courtesy due to strangers gradually evolved into the easy fellowship that could develop among travelers sharing the common experience of life on the road. The merchants shared news from Canterbury and the towns they had visited during their journey. There was talk of wool prices and trading conditions, of roads made muddy by recent rains and bridges that needed repair. But there was also discussion of more pleasant topics: festivals being planned in various towns, marriages and births in the families of people they knew, and the small incidents of travel that became stories worth telling when shared around a comfortable fire. Owen found himself drawn into these conversations, his role as host making him a natural focus for the exchange of information that was one of the most valuable services an inn could provide. Travelers depended on innkeepers not just for food and shelter, but for knowledge of road conditions, weather patterns, and the thousand small details that could make the difference between a successful journey and a difficult one. The ford at Wickham Bridge is running higher than usual, Owen mentioned during a discussion of the best route north toward London. The rains last week brought the water up, and while it's certainly passable, merchants with heavy wagons might want to take the extra time to use the stone bridge at Millbrook. This kind of practical information was invaluable to travelers, and Owen could see the merchants making mental notes that might influence their route planning for the next day's travel. It was another aspect of hospitality, sharing knowledge that could help ensure his guests' continued safety and success. As the evening progressed, one of the merchants produced a wooden flute from his travel bag, explaining that music helped him relax after long days on the road. The instrument was simple but well made, its tone sweet and clear as he began to play melodies that were familiar to travelers throughout the region. The music added another dimension to the evening's fellowship. The merchants who knew the songs hummed along, while others simply listened with the particular pleasure that came from hearing music performed with skill and genuine feeling. Owen found himself remembering the words to some of the older songs, ballads about brave knights and faithful lovers, drinking songs that celebrated the pleasures of good fellowship, and the haunting melodies that spoke of home and the people left behind during long journeys. Nutmeg, who had been observing the evening's activities from her customary place on the blue wool cushion, decided that the presence of so many people warranted closer investigation. She made her dignified way among the merchants, accepting the attention and small scraps of food that were offered with the regal manner that cats brought to such encounters. "A handsome beast," Thomas observed, scratching Nutmeg behind the ears with the confidence of someone who understood cats. "Does she earn her keep catching mice?" "She does indeed," Owen replied, "but I think she considers that merely her secondary occupation. Her primary job seems to be ensuring that the inn maintains proper standards of comfort and hospitality. She's an excellent judge of character. I've never known her to take to anyone who proved untrustworthy." The fire burned steadily throughout the evening, its flames providing both warmth and the kind of dancing light that made faces appear friendly and conversation flow easily. Owen tended it periodically, adding logs as needed to maintain the perfect balance of heat and illumination that made the common room a welcoming gathering place. As the evening grew later, some of the merchants began to show signs of the weariness that a long day's travel inevitably brought. The younger men might have been content to continue their fellowship well into the night, but their elders understood the value of adequate rest before facing another day on the road. "Master Blackthorn," Thomas said, setting down his empty ale cup with the satisfied gesture of a man who had enjoyed both drink and company. "This has been an evening that will be remembered with pleasure long after our business in London is concluded. Your hospitality does credit to your profession and your establishment." The other merchants murmured their agreement, and Owen felt the warm satisfaction that came from seeing his careful preparations appreciated by guests whose opinion carried weight in the commercial world. These men would return to Canterbury with stories of their stay at the Hearthstone, and those stories would bring other travelers to his door in the months and years to come. "You are most kind, Master Thomas," Owen replied. "It has been our pleasure to serve you. I hope your chambers will provide the rest you need for tomorrow's journey." One by one, the merchants began to take their leave of the common room, each man carrying with him a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere physical comfort. They had found not just adequate lodging, but genuine hospitality, the kind of welcome that reminded them of the best aspects of human fellowship and made the challenges of travel seem worthwhile. Owen remained in the common room as his guests retired, banking the fire for the night and ensuring that everything was secure for the hours of darkness ahead. The evening had unfolded exactly as he had hoped. Tired travelers had found comfort, careful preparation had met genuine need, and the ancient rituals of hospitality had once again worked their magic in transforming strangers into temporary friends. Chapter 11. The Settling Night. As the last of his guests disappeared up the narrow wooden stairs to their chambers, Owen found himself alone in the common room for the first time since the merchant's arrival. The space seemed larger somehow, as spaces always did when they emptied of human presence, but it retained the warmth and contentment that came from an evening of successful hospitality. The great hearth continued to burn steadily, its flames now lower, but still providing both heat and the gentle dancing light that made even solitude comfortable. Owen moved through the common room with the quiet efficiency of someone performing a familiar ritual. Empty ale cups were collected and carried to the kitchen, where they would await tomorrow's washing. Wooden platters that had held bread and cheese were stacked neatly, their surfaces wiped clean of crumbs that might attract mice during the night hours. The process of securing the inn for night was one that Owen had performed thousands of times, yet he never allowed it to become merely automatic. Each task served a purpose, not just in maintaining cleanliness and order, but in ensuring the safety and security that guests expected when they placed themselves under an innkeeper's protection. The great front door received his particular attention. The heavy oak portal was fitted with iron bands and a substantial lock that, while rarely used, provided both actual security and the psychological comfort that came from knowing valuable goods and vulnerable travelers were protected during the night hours. Owen checked the lock mechanism, ensuring that it would function properly if circumstances required its use, then settled for the more usual practice of simply barring the door from within. Moving through the ground floor, Owen extinguished the oil lamps that were no longer needed, trimming their wicks and ensuring that they were positioned safely away from anything that might catch fire. The inn's construction was solid timber and stone, but fire remained the greatest threat to any medieval building, and Owen's vigilance in such matters was one of the reasons the Hearthstone had survived and prospered for so many years. In the kitchen, he found that Marta had completed her own evening preparations with characteristic thoroughness. The cooking fire had been banked to maintain a bed of coals that would make morning's fire starting much easier, while pots and cooking implements had been cleaned and arranged for the next day's use. The kitchen stood ready for morning, when the process of feeding guests would begin anew with the simple but nourishing breakfast that would send the merchants on their way properly fortified for travel. Owen prepared a small pot of spiced wine, adding cinnamon bark and a few cloves to ale that he warmed carefully over the kitchen's banked fire. This was a personal indulgence, a quiet cup of something warming and comforting to mark the transition from the day's work to the evening's rest. The spices released their fragrance as they heated, creating an aroma that spoke of comfort and contemplation. Carrying his cup of spiced wine, Owen made his way back to the common room, where the fire had settled into the steady, comfortable burning that would maintain warmth throughout the night. He settled into his favorite chair, a well-worn piece of oak furniture that had been shaped by years of use into something that fit his body perfectly, and allowed himself the luxury of simply sitting quietly in his own establishment. From his chair, Owen could hear the subtle sounds that indicated all was well within the inn. Above him, the gentle creaking of floorboards spoke of guests moving about their chambers as they prepared for sleep. These were not the urgent, hurried sounds of distress or discomfort, but the peaceful noises of people settling into comfortable beds after a day of honest travel. The inn's timbers themselves contributed to the evening's symphony, settling with small sighs and creaks as the day's warmth gave way to cooler night air. These sounds, which might have seemed ominous to a stranger, were as familiar and comforting to Owen as a lullaby. They spoke of solid construction and honest materials, of a building that had weathered decades of seasons and would continue to provide shelter for decades more. Through the diamond-paned windows, Owen could see that full darkness had settled over the countryside. The moon, nearly full, cast silver light across the courtyard, where the merchants' wagons stood secure under their canvas covers. The sight gave him satisfaction. Valuable goods and tired travelers both safe under his protection, exactly as they should be. Nutmeg emerged from whatever mysterious business had occupied her during the evening's activities, and leapt gracefully onto Owen's lap, settling herself with the entitled manner that cats brought to such arrangements. Her purring added another layer to the evening's peaceful sounds, and Owen found himself stroking her marmalade fur with the absent attention of long familiarity. The spiced wine was warm and comforting, its flavors complex enough to provide interest without being so strong as to disturb the evening's peaceful mood. Owen sipped it slowly, allowing its warmth to relax muscles that had been tense with the day's responsibilities. This was his favorite time, the quiet hour when the day's work was done and done well, when guests were comfortable and secure, and when he could take satisfaction in the knowledge that his establishment had once again lived up to its reputation. From a shelf beside his chair, Owen took down a small book, a collection of psalms written in a clear hand and illuminated with simple but beautiful designs in red and blue ink. This was not the elaborate manuscript that might grace a cathedral's library, but the honest work of a monastery's scriptorium, created for use rather than display. The book had been a gift from a grateful pilgrim years ago, and Owen had come to treasure both its contents and the circumstances of its acquisition. Reading by the fire's light, Owen found the familiar words both soothing and inspiring. The Psalms spoke of travelers protected on their journeys, of hospitality offered to strangers, and of the satisfaction that came from honest work performed with care and attention. They seemed particularly appropriate to his circumstances and calling. As he read, Owen became aware of a change in the inn's atmosphere. The sounds from the chambers above had gradually quieted as his guests settled into sleep. The building itself seemed to sigh with contentment, its timbers and stones holding the warmth and security that made peaceful rest possible. The fire continued to burn steadily, its flames now lower, but still providing adequate warmth and light. Owen added another log, selected for its slow-burning properties, and arranged it carefully to ensure that some warmth would remain when morning came. This was the innkeeper's last duty of the day, ensuring that the hearth that was the heart of hospitality would continue to burn, ready to welcome guests to a new day and new journeys. Outside, the night was clear and still, with stars visible through the window glass and the moon casting its silver light across the peaceful countryside. Owen could hear the distant sound of church bells marking the late hour, their bronze voices carrying clearly across the fields and forests that surrounded the inn. The satisfaction Owen felt as he prepared for his own rest was deep and genuine. Another day had passed successfully. Another group of travelers had found the comfort and security they sought, and the reputation of the Hearthstone Inn had been enhanced by the kind of careful attention to detail that made the difference between adequate service and genuine hospitality. Rising from his chair with the careful movements of a man whose body bore the honest fatigue of a day's work well done, Owen made his final circuit of the common room. The fire was properly banked, the doors were secure, and all was in readiness for the night hours ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to practice the ancient art of hospitality. But for now, Owen was content with the knowledge that his guests slept safely and comfortably under his roof, and that the Hearthstone Inn continued to earn its reputation as a place where travelers could find not just adequate shelter, but genuine welcome and care. Chapter 12. Dawn. Preparation. The first grey light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the diamond-paned windows when Owen stirred from his sleep, awakened not by any urgent summons, but by the internal clock that years of innkeeping had developed within him. This was the quiet hour before the inn truly awakened, when the building held the peaceful stillness of night, while preparing for the gentle activity of morning. Owen rose from his bed in the small chamber behind the kitchen that served as his private quarters, moving with the careful quietness of someone who understood that his guest's rest was precious and should not be disturbed unnecessarily. Through his window, he could see that the night had been clear and still, leaving no mud in the courtyard and no evidence of the rain that the messenger had predicted might arrive before morning. In the kitchen, Owen found that the banked fire had maintained its bed of coals exactly as he had planned. A few pieces of kindling and some gentle encouragement with the bellows brought flames dancing to life, ready to heat water for washing and begin the preparation of morning fare. The kitchen came alive gradually around him, filled with the soft sounds of someone who worked with practiced efficiency and genuine care. Marta appeared shortly after Owen had the fire burning properly, her hair neatly braided and her face showing the alert contentment of someone who had slept well and was ready for the day's work. Together, they began the morning preparations that would send their guests on their way properly fed and grateful for their stay at the Hearthstone. The merchants were well pleased with yesterday evening's fare, Marta observed as she began assembling the ingredients for morning porridge. Master Thomas particularly praised the stew and asked if we might provide similar provisions for their noon meal today. Owen nodded with satisfaction. Such requests were both compliments to their cooking and opportunities to provide additional service that enhanced the inn's reputation. We can certainly prepare traveling provisions. Some of yesterday's bread, cheese from our best wheel, and perhaps some of the dried meat from the pantry. Simple fare, but nourishing enough to sustain them until they reach their next proper lodging. The morning porridge was a substantial affair. Oats cooked slowly with milk and water until they achieved the perfect consistency, neither too thick nor too thin. To this base, Marta added honey from the inn's own hives and dried fruit that had been carefully preserved from the previous autumn's harvest. The result was food that would provide sustained energy for travelers facing a long day on the road. As the porridge simmered, Owen attended to other morning preparations. Fresh bread, baked just the day before, was sliced and arranged on wooden platters. Butter, churned from cream that was still sweet and fresh, was formed into neat pats and kept cool in earthenware crocks. Small beer, light enough for morning consumption but substantial enough to provide nourishment, was drawn from the cask and transferred to clay jugs ready for serving. The sounds from the chambers above indicated that the merchants were beginning to stir. Owen could hear the soft footsteps and muffled conversations that spoke of travelers preparing themselves for another day's journey. Soon they would make their way downstairs, and the common room would once again be filled with the pleasant bustle of morning departure preparations. Thomas was the first to appear, his face showing the refreshed alertness of someone who had slept well in a comfortable bed. His clothes were neat and travel-ready, and his manner suggested the satisfaction of a man who had found exactly the kind of lodging he had hoped to discover. "Good morning, Master Blackthorn," Thomas said, accepting a cup of small beer with obvious appreciation. "I trust I speak for all my companions when I say that we have rarely passed a more comfortable night on the road. Your establishment does credit to your profession." Owen felt the warm satisfaction that such compliments always brought, but his response was characteristically modest. "You are most kind, Master Thomas. I hope the morning finds you well rested and ready for the day's travel ahead." One by one, the other merchants appeared in the common room, each man showing the signs of genuine rest and comfort that marked a successful night's lodging. They gathered around the great hearth, now burning brightly with the morning fire, sharing the quiet camaraderie that often developed among travelers who had shared good food and comfortable shelter. The morning meal was served with the same attention to detail that had marked the previous evening's service. Porridge was ladled into wooden bowls, its surface steaming in the cool morning air, and its aroma filling the common room with the promise of substantial nourishment. Bread and butter accompanied it, along with small beer that would provide both hydration and energy for the hours ahead. As his guests ate, Owen moved among them, ensuring that each man's needs were understood and addressed. Some required assistance with securing their personal belongings. Others wanted advice about road conditions or the best routes to their destinations. All seemed grateful for the care and attention they had received during their stay. The process of departure unfolded with the same organized efficiency that had marked their arrival. Personal packs were gathered and secured. Final payments were made with the satisfaction of customers who felt they had received full value for their money, and traveling provisions were distributed to those who had requested them. In the stable yard, the merchants' horses showed the signs of a night's good rest and proper care. Their coats gleamed from the brushing that Owen had given them. Their eyes were bright and alert, and their manner suggested animals ready for another day's work. The wagons, too, had received attention. Wheels checked for soundness, axles greased where needed, and canvas covers adjusted to protect their valuable cargo. The process of hitching and loading proceeded smoothly, with each merchant attending to his own responsibilities, while Owen moved among them, offering assistance where needed and ensuring that no detail was overlooked. This was perhaps the most critical time of any stay, when tired travelers became active participants in the day's commerce once again, and when small oversights could create large problems. As the caravan prepared to depart, Thomas approached Owen with a small leather purse. "A token of our appreciation, Master Blackthorn, for hospitality that exceeded our expectations. Word of your establishment will be spoken with gratitude in Canterbury and beyond." Owen accepted the purse with genuine thanks, understanding that it represented not just additional payment, but recognition of service well provided. Such gestures, and the recommendations they implied, were worth far more than their immediate monetary value. The caravan departed in the same orderly fashion that had marked their arrival, with wagons forming up in single file and mounted guards taking their positions alongside the valuable cargo. The harness bells that had announced their coming now marked their going, their musical jingling gradually fading as the merchants continued their journey toward London and the commercial opportunities that awaited them there. Owen stood in the courtyard watching until the last wagon disappeared around the bend in the road, then turned his attention to the inn that was once again quiet and peaceful. The bustle of departure gave way to the gentler rhythm of an establishment returning to its normal state, ready for whatever new challenges and opportunities the day might bring. In the stable, the empty stalls awaited fresh straw and preparation for the next group of travelers who might seek shelter. In the chambers above, beds needed to be stripped and remade, floors swept, and wash basins refilled. The kitchen required its own attention. Dishes to be washed, provisions to be checked, and preparations made for whatever the day might demand. But for now, Owen allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Another group of travelers had found the comfort and security they sought. Another test of his establishment's reputation had been passed successfully, and the ancient traditions of hospitality had once again proven their worth in making the challenges of travel more bearable and the human connections that made civilization possible more real and meaningful. The sun climbed higher in the eastern sky, promising a day of fair weather and good traveling conditions. Somewhere along the Canterbury Road, church bells would soon be ringing to mark the morning hours, and other inns would be beginning their own cycles of welcome and departure. But here at the Hearthstone, Owen felt the deep contentment that came from work well done and a calling faithfully fulfilled. The inn stood ready for whatever the new day might bring. Empty chambers waiting to be filled, a stable prepared to shelter weary horses, and a hearth ready to welcome strangers into the warmth of genuine hospitality. This was the rhythm that had governed Owen's life for nearly 3 decades, and it was a rhythm that gave meaning and purpose to each day's work. As he made his way back into the inn to begin the tasks that would prepare it for the next group of travelers, Owen reflected on the simple truth that had guided his career as an innkeeper, that the difference between mere shelter and genuine hospitality lay not in grand gestures or expensive amenities, but in the countless small attentions that showed travelers they were valued and cared for during their time away from home. The Hearthstone Inn would continue to earn its reputation one guest at a time, one carefully prepared meal at a time, one night of peaceful rest at a time. And Owen would continue to find satisfaction in the knowledge that his work made the world a slightly more comfortable and welcoming place for those who traveled the ancient roads that connected distant places, and brought strangers together in the fellowship of shared shelter and common need.